Much like Joe Rogan, I think Jordan Peterson is one of the most intentionally misrepresented people on the planet, and this debate versus 20 atheists is absolutely no different. From people intentionally arguing in bad faith, to people purposefully mischaracterizing or strawmanning his position, or even just outright insulting him, we're going to get into all of it. This video will be reviewing Jordan's third claim of the debate. If you would like to watch my video reviewing his second claim, make sure to click right up here. With nothing further, I'm going to let the man introduce himself and get right into the video.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena.
So I want to start off this part of the clip by saying that Zena takes up about 3/4 of the time that's allotted to this particular claim, but it was extremely well thought out. Both sides were able to get very deep into the issue, and I think that this part of the conversation is extremely important if you were to ever try and say anything about Peterson and what it means to be religious in his worldview.
So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you could call it top or bottom, I suppose.
Right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right.
This is actually part of why this conversation is so good, because Zena already has some sort of understanding of Peterson's worldview. So unlike a couple of the other people from the other claims, Peterson doesn't have to try and already define terms that he has defined himself over the last 10 years. She already has an understanding of a lot of this, so he doesn't need to bog her down or waste any of her time with any of that.
I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God, and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell. So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what Peterson's describing here is nothing more than the intersectionality problem. Intersectionality means that there are infinite interpretations of any given structure, any given system, any given thing, any given idea. But there is a massive difference between something having an infinite number of interpretations and having an infinite number of valid interpretations. If we are going to define God as the ultimate moral good, then the only valid interpretation of God through a value structure would be the structuring of values in such a way that it does the most good for the most amount of people for the longest span of time, because any other interpretation would mean it falls short of the definition of God. And as Peterson said, this is actually why humanity is constantly at war with itself, is because the value structure of one group of people might be even ever so slightly different from the value structure of another group of people, and we have to fight intellectually or otherwise to determine whose value structure is actually the better value structure for society.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So In a sense, this is why.
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
And so it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence.
Oh, right, okay. It is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what?
And again, this is something that atheists and other people don't seem to understand from Peterson's first claim, when Peterson says that atheists don't know what they're saying when they say that they reject God, because in Peterson's worldview, at the bottom of every value structure is God. So if you are going to follow any value structure, you inherently are worshiping some form of God. And an atheist would be somebody that rejects all gods and essentially is a nihilist, because they have no ultimate end goal. They have no purpose in life. They have no value structure that they're putting forth. It's just pure nihilism. And you can disagree with his definition if you want to, but we have to look at this debate through the lens of his worldview if we are going to actually have a conversation about it. I also like that Peterson makes it clear that good is goal dependent, but I also want to make it clear that this does not mean that Peterson believes in subjective morality. He very much believes in objective morality. And a key piece of evidence that Peterson and other moral objectivists use is the fact that the stories told in the Bible and told in other religious texts, the morality that's ingrained in those stories has survived the test of time over thousands, possibly even tens of thousands of years. For instance, things like courage and integrity and generosity can be seen as universal moral truths because they have been seen as universal moral truths for thousands or tens of thousands of years through all of the major stories and figureheads that we have seen throughout the millennia. While things like corruption and greed and the causing of unnecessary death and destruction have been seen as universal moral wrongs for the same span of time. That's not to say that these universal moral truths cannot go too far. For instance, you can be too generous, you end up sacrificing too much of yourself, and that causes you to not be able to benefit yourself or the people around you for the most amount of time. And you can be too courageous, which causes you to be reckless, which causes you to take unnecessary action or unnecessary risk, which could damage you or the people around you. And again, this is why humanity is constantly fighting itself, is because we are constantly trying to find the lines to be able to find the perfect value structure and the perfect resemblance of the values in order to be the best for society. For instance, we know that courage can go too far, but we don't know the exact line between courage and recklessness. So we constantly are at war with ourselves to figure out where that line is. And we know that corruption is a moral wrong, but we also know that because we are imperfect beings, that corruption will always exist. So do we go at it 100% and try and purge 100% of corruption? Well, that might not be to the best benefit for the broad society, because there might be other moral wrongs that need to take precedent that we need to deal with first. So humanity is going to constantly be at war with itself because we are never really going to be able to find the line on where all of these different metrics have to stack up.
What makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances. Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. You give up voluntarily and with courage, all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people.
Right.
Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can
Right.
definitely say it that
Thank
way.
you.
That's exactly right. And
Right.
navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
The Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example.
Yeah.
And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
So is that
addressing
person
the
Christian,
same-
though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because
Exactly.
they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right? So,
Christianity.
so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like
8/12
that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well,
don't understand.
I hesitate to do that personally, because
Okay.
I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act
And how you say
and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same.
So this entire section is just to boil down what it means to be Christian. And according to Peterson, what it means is that at the bottom of your value structure, you are willing to self-sacrifice voluntarily anything and everything that is necessary to benefit the most amount of people, the most benefit over the longest span of time. It's not necessarily to call yourself Christian, because according to Christ, those who proclaim the Lord but do not act out the belief are not going to make it into heaven. So the ones who act out the beliefs are the ones that are truly considered to be believers. And in order for this to make logical sense, eventually what you say, what you think, and what you do would stack up all together to create a cohesive value structure. And again, you are more than welcome to disagree with this definition if you want. There are definitely puritanical Christians that think that if you do not proclaim Christ as your savior and think that he resurrected, that it's impossible for you to actually be a Christian because you are rejecting or don't believe in certain fundamental characteristics of Christianity. And that's perfectly fine. But again, if we're going to talk about the debate, we need to be able to look at this through Peterson's worldview. All in all, I think the talk between Zena and Peterson was very informative, and both sides were able to get their points across very well. And it was very briefly talked about, but we did talk about the topic of the claim, because Peterson's worldview is that everything within your hierarchy of, your value structure is things that you worship. And the more you get to the foundation or the pinnacle, depending on how you like the metaphor, the closer you get to that foundation or peak, the more you are worshiping something, the more you are attending to it, the more you are sacrificing for it.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
Oh, Danny. Well, we all know what he went viral for, but luckily it's only 2.5 minutes and it's very easy to break down. So we'll just briefly cover him.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
If Peterson had actually fleshed out his definition of worship a little bit more, the rest of this conversation never would have happened.
Okay, do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay, so do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary?
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the...
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics...
sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand...
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition.
And this is what I mean, because if Peterson had been able to flesh out his definition a little more rather than narrowing it for the sake of time, again, this misunderstanding wouldn't have happened, although I do think Danny intentionally was misunderstanding it and trying to use this as a gotcha on Peterson, a lot like Parker.
But your original
I
definition...
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar...
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause
Christian
I won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
No, I'll give him props. Yes, he was witty with coming up with a good comeback. And yes, Jordan Peterson probably shouldn't be on a video trying to represent Christians when he has literally never claimed that he has been a Christian. But when you're going to spend 2.5 minutes attacking somebody over their beliefs instead of actually trying to debate in good faith, I'm just not going to give you any respect. And for the record, no, I don't think him or Parker were actually there to take the debate seriously. They're looking to clip farm. They're looking exactly for this kind of gotcha moment so that they can go viral and get some more views on whatever platforms they're on.
Hi there.
Hi, nice to meet
What's
you.
your name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
The
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your
Okay.
trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love
okay.
her. So I
Right.
prioritize and I
Okay.
sacrifice for her.
Right, right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say. And
Sure.
what else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage?
I mean, I'm married to my wife because I love her. That's
Yeah.
also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right,
Okay.
so even the small things, I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end.
Of
That's
course.
the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
Now, Peterson makes this sound kind of cryptic. I'm going to try and decode it a little bit. So I don't think Gerard completely understands Peterson's definition of worship by responding to his question with saying that he loves his wife, therefore he attends to and sacrifices for her. Because Peterson's entire point is that the sacrificing and attending to his wife is his worship of his wife, and he worships her because he loves her. And I don't think Gerard entirely understands the question that Peterson asks him when he says, what value does your love and your marriage serve? Because again, worship is in levels. It's not a black or white type of thing. It's not you worship something or you don't. It's you can worship things more than other things. So the fact that you are willing to sacrifice and attend to your wife means that you are worshiping your wife. The level that you are willing to sacrifice and attend to your wife determines the level of worship for your wife. If you are willing to sacrifice anything in order to attend to her, then that means that you are worshiping her to an extreme degree. If you're not willing to sacrifice that much to attend to her, then you don't worship her to that high of a degree. And the reason that's relevant is because the level that you are willing to sacrifice and attend to something is directly proportional to the level that that thing helps you towards your ultimate end goal, even if you don't exactly know what that end goal is yet. So for instance, like Peterson said for the date scenario, if your end goal in that scenario is a long-term relationship, the amount of attention and sacrifice that you're going to put into certain aspects of the date is going to be completely different than if the end goal of the date is short-term sexual gratification. So in life, if you have a very long-term aim and your marriage is helping with that, then you are going to be more willing to sacrifice and attend to your marriage to help you towards that ultimate goal. But if your marriage does not help you towards that ultimate goal or is hindering you from that ultimate goal in your view, whether that's rational or not, you are going to be less willing to sacrifice and attend to it, which means that your worship of it is going to be much lower.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship is almost a spectrum, right? It's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like that's a good question.
When
It's
when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I
apparently.
worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love? See, I'm trying to define something. What do you mean worship?
Well,
I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you
So do you
presumably
have
worship
that
God.
attitude towards your wife?
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over any other human, but I don't think that she is some
You're making
supernatural
the
being.
assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're
I'm
either going in many directions,
Okay.
or you're going in one
So
direction.
let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship, right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the
How
closer
close?
you get...
Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
I do want to point out that this doesn't actually defeat the argument, because if you take the pyramid and you shatter it into bits, then all of those bits are unilevel, which means that it doesn't matter if it's the top or the bottom, you're going to worship them all the same.
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is
I mean,
it? So it's just an opinion that
plenty of-
Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on
Well,
opinions.
just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true. I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine
Okay,
does.
good. Well,
So it's about purpose
so
and
let me,
definitions.
yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then.
Okay.
Depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So
and maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what, you're seeking for.
And as Peterson points out again, the depth of your worship is dependent on what your ultimate end goal is. Use the book analogy. If you are just wanting to read like short novels, then something like Catcher in the Rye or a short graphic novel would be at the top of your hierarchy, and something like War and Peace would be at the bottom. If you want to read very in-depth great literature, then something like War and Peace might be all the way at the top. And if your end goal is sexual gratification, then a porno magazine might be at the very top. But again, it's all dependent on your ultimate end goal.
And
if you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And
There's no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you...
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because
well,
you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them to, for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or devoted believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen, but it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
So Peterson has made many arguments against nihilism in the past, and one of his main arguments is pain is real. And if you ask a nihilist or you subject a nihilist to pain, they're going to act as if that pain has meaning. It might be a negative meaning, but it is a meaning. And if you know that pain is real and pain has a negative meaning, then that obviously implies that there has to be something that has a positive meaning that is also real. They also get into this argument about nihilists being happy. And I think Peterson's argument is that nihilists aren't necessarily happy because Peterson's definition of happiness is more of a long-term satisfaction rather than an in-the-moment spur of a positive feeling. Gerard also doubles down on this by pointing out that there are unhappy Christians and other religious people, showing that religion in and of itself is not enough to make somebody happy, and that there can be happy people that do not need religion. And again, this comes down to your definition of happy. You define it as an in the moment spur of a positive feeling, or are you talking about an over the long-term form of satisfaction? Because like Peterson pointed out, it's very well documented that people that are religious generally have better long-term standards of mental health than those who are not religious. And Peterson uses the story of Job to drive this point home. If you have a structure of meaning in your life, then even when everything is going completely wrong, as long as you hold true to that structure, it is possible to get through all of that catastrophe and loss and still come out the other end, maybe worse for wear, but not entirely destroyed. And if you're lucky, maybe something positive comes out of it. Overall, I think this entire thing was fine. I think they were kind of talking past each other at some points, and sometimes one person didn't understand exactly the definition of the other, especially when it came to the definition of happiness. But all in all, I think this went okay. And the main thing I got from this entire claim is that if everybody at the debate had been like Xena, and they were actually interested in asking questions and trying to figure things out, rather than trying to attack somebody and get some quick clickbait videos to go viral, then this entire debate could have had a completely different meaning to it than what it ended up having. But hey, I'm just some white guy. What do I know? And that was my overview of Jordan Peterson's third claim from the debate, that everybody worships something, including atheists, even if they don't know it. If you thought I got everything right and enjoyed the video, make sure to give me a thumbs up. If you thought I got something wrong or didn't enjoy the video, make sure to give me a thumbs down and let me know what I got wrong in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.